those rules are being made by insurance executives, by legislators around the country who aren't requiring it, many of whom don't or have not gone through addiction themselves. And I'm not saying that you need to have an assembly and a senate in a state filled with former addicts to understand and get this done correctly. But I do think that there's, in that underestimation that we talked about, that lay people, including myself before I started this research on the pharmaceutical industry 6 and 7 years ago, we think of recovery as a much simpler, straightforward process.
This is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need.
Welcoming to Don't Hide the Scars, author of Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America, Gerald Posner. Thank you so much for joining founder of Pain, Flindt, Andersen, myself, Jason LaChance. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. You do great work with Don't Hide the Scars. And I see in terms of what you have, a broad, eclectic mix of people who have themselves been subject to addiction and gotten to recovery, and then the issues around it. And it's important information. So I'm very happy to join you on this podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And we were having a little sidebar here before we started about a gentleman that you had brought up. Was making such a valid point about how some people clean up their lives and then just get out of this space of I guess, advocacy as the simplest term.
And you've pointed this out before on some of your podcast. All of us, it seems like everybody knows somebody who's in recovery or in need of being in recovery. That often happens. And I think that although I've watched people get their lives back together in terms of recovery, it's a very difficult process. And people sometimes start and stop, and sometimes they step back and they take 2 steps forward and a step back. And when people do get into recovery and they're able to pull themselves together, it's such an arduous and difficult process that they're ready to sort of get on with their lives at that point. And I understand why they don't want to stay in advocacy. As you have here with Don't Hide the Scars, or T. Wolf has in San Francisco. You take heat all the time. People disagree with you. They don't like what you said. They think that you're being too harsh on this or that, or you're taking all types of criticism and heat. What you're really trying to do is just offer a bit of a guideline and a bit of help to people who are looking for it. And I'm not surprised that there aren't more people doing it. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so grateful when I see people like, Don't Hide the Scars or Wolf or others doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. You make such a great point, and I don't think we've talked about this much, but I think a lot of where that comes from, I'm considered the old guy now, right? I'm the old timer, and even though I'm 18 from the neck up, and but what I've seen, especially when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, I am a fan of AA. I will always be a fan of AA, but for so many years, and even to this day, this is all supposed to be quiet stuff. This is supposed to be about anonymity. You're not supposed to go out and do advocacy for AA, right? So I think a lot of people that have been in AA feel that way. Now, not everybody is going to go out and talk about their story. That we
Right.
understand. That's a tough thing to do. Even when I wanted to start this, I had to go to my family and explain to them what I wanted to do. And a couple of them said, "Yeah, Dad, go for it." A couple others said, "I don't know." And I said, "I'm not going to give up too many stories here, but I think that's an issue." And Gerald, you said something when we were talking before the show about the long, arduous journey about recovery, and it's not easy, and the things that we have to do, and that's not an excuse by any means whatsoever. But as I look at treatment in general, as I look about the addicts that are still out there, people don't understand. The powers that be don't understand. And I'm going to give you the example. We talk a lot around here about how the system is broken, how in my opinion, treatment comes down to 2 things. It comes down to those that have insurance and the cash available to pay for treatment, and those that don't. And on both sides, our treatment systems are broken. They don't understand that you don't change behavior and addiction in a 30-day program. They don't understand that you just can't shove somebody in an outpatient program. They don't understand that they have to be detoxed medically and properly, okay, in order for that brain to start to heal. And until those things, until we can get that message across to, the people here in California and across the country, I just don't think much is going to change.
Yeah, no, I happen to think that's right. And going back from what you said, when you were saying that about AA, Trisha, my wife, who works with me on projects and everything else, is sitting about 10 feet away from me. And she said, as you were saying that, good point. And I was thinking the same thing. I'd never thought about that before. But the whole idea that you don't go out and necessarily take out a banner and put on the corner of your house that you just finished AA and you've gotten through the process and you advertise it and you talk about it at social events and everything else. It's a very good point. It sort of was the opposite of what we needed in some ways, although it's a very good system. But I understand why that may not work today. And the problem is, and you've sort of then moved on to the core of one of the biggest problems, what is necessary for real recovery and the opportunity of recovery more than just a 30-day program, even if you have insurance. And so much of what becomes the money aspect of this is checking the box. So the insurance companies, if you have insurance, will provide coverage for X amount, right? You'll get your 30 days. The treatment recovery programs and clinics that are established, for instance, we live in Miami-Dade. North of us in Delray Beach is one of the biggest communities, a lot of treatment clinics and everything else, sort of a small industry, and a lot of people are helped, but they know, those clinics know when your insurance stops paying. And very few of them are doing Mother Teresa's work or going on and saying, let's do this pro bono or as a charity. They don't have that arm. And so therefore, when the system stops, and I think, those rules are being made by insurance executives, by legislators around the country who aren't requiring it, many of whom don't or have not gone through addiction themselves. And I'm not saying that you need to have an assembly and a Senate in a state filled with former addicts to understand and get this done correctly. But I do think that there's, in that underestimation that we talked about, that lay people, including myself before I started this research on the pharmaceutical industry 6 and 7 years ago, we think of recovery as a much simpler, straightforward process. You're addicted, you can just as easily get off with a little bit of willpower and a couple of weeks of hard time. And, that's as insane as anything you could possibly say.
I would have to agree.
You bet.
Well, and I think sometimes so many, a lot of people's exposure in addition, yes, they might know someone, of course. Everyone knows someone. Everyone does. But if they're not directly involved with it, like in their family unit or whatever it is, sometimes it's through fiction that's a reflection thereof. And we get movies where there's a nice bow at the end of it or whatever it is, and people, I think, do have that perception. It's like, oh yeah, you got a 30-day break and that time to figure on yourself. Well, a lot of us, like Flindt says, it started, childhood. I grew up in a home of it. I didn't know really other ways, to fix some of those things inside or silence those things. So 30 days isn't going to break that cycle. It's a reprieve, and we might be able to, as Flindt said, detox someone, start them on the path to getting healthy, but it's a road. It's very interesting. You understand this so well. You're doing this all the time, Flindt. You've been through it. There's so many variables as you go through recovery as well. The support system, the people around you, things that at moments can make or break or keep you on that path. And I think that one of the things is it's very hard for, especially in terms of modern press coverage, what gets the headlines or the news pieces on Good Morning America, the Today Show, or 60 Minutes or a newspaper or whatever else. It's not the more nuanced story of someone who has fallen completely hostage to a whole host of different types of drugs and is trying to get their life back. It's the images of addicts along the street in Philadelphia on Trank.
Yep.
It's the open air drug markets in San Francisco, and so it's the worst part of, not to say worse. There's no worse or better. It doesn't matter if you're really addicted to heroin as a lawyer in some Wall Street office, or it's worse if you're on the street. I agree, but the point is that I think that the public thinks of it often as, Joe, this is a problem affecting the homeless. This is a problem affecting just people on the street. And look at, and they don't want recovery. This is what you'll hear from lay people. And I think, that's one of the craziest things I've ever heard. How do you assume that? But that's so fascinating that I think that skewed the view for the general public and much of the media, unfortunately. Why aren't you, for instance, with Don't Hide the Scars? I don't ask you this as a real question, it's sort of a rhetorical question. Why aren't you being featured on 60 Minutes? It should be. Or why, you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Because it's not as sensational, not as showing people in Philadelphia on Trank.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
One of the things I've tried to do around here in our area is, and again, I don't say this with any arrogance, but I'm kind of the go-to guy in our area for the news and news media, when it comes to if somebody passes away or if there's new drugs out there, whatever the case may be. But what I've tried to do is, because in the beginning, these news companies would come in, they'd do an interview, and then all of a sudden their cameras that start showing pictures of those people that are living under a bridge somewhere. And I would tell him, I would say, look, I said, every time you do that, the normal person gets up and gets a sandwich, all right, or turns off the television because they can't relate to that. Yeah. They don't understand that if you start showing these houses that are in the and again, the better neighborhoods, the finer neighborhoods, whatever you want to call them, that this is affecting that high school football player, that just signed a letter of intent to SC and then lost it, because of his addiction. That's what nobody has done on a consistent basis.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And this is related. To my 2 cents. I think that, having worked through this book on the pharmaceutical industry, and a lot of it, about a third of the book, focuses on the opioid addiction, that one of the reasons, look at pharma companies get away with murder all the time, sometimes literally murder, but they get away with it. Yeah. One of the reasons the Sacklers, Purdue, all the distributors, the other companies that were manufacturers of opioids got away with it for so long is because the people who were patients were considered by many in the public just as addicts eventually. Yes. So it wasn't as though they were children who got an asthma drug that happened then to, it's not as though they were receiving hormone therapy or the contraceptive pill was defective and causing cancers 10 years down the road. These were people who somehow not had asked for it themselves, but they had fallen prey to addiction, right? And so it's one of the reasons there wasn't more outrage, I think, for a long time. These companies got away with it for a much longer period because they painted the patients as not victims, but as the problem. It's the patients demanding the drugs, and all we're doing is manufacturing it. And for a while, that worked, and should have. And it's one of the reasons that I am so particularly infuriated about the opioid crisis, because, as you well know, you can be completely addicted to powerful opioids without ever having bought a drug on the street. You don't have to go and buy black tar heroin or meth or whatever else, or you can get benzos and get your opioids if you have the right prescriber, and you can drink some alcohol from at the liquor store, and you can make yourself pretty much a zombie drug addict legally, in that sense.
Gerald, I'm interested to know what piqued your interest in doing this book, because and the reason why I'm asking that is back in 2010, I started this in 2009, but even then in 2009, I knew what Purdue was doing. 2010, 11, 12, 13. I mean, again, I was all over that, trying to let people know this is what's out there. This is the Sacklers and everything that goes along with it, the absolute chaos they created in this thing. But because I'm thrilled that you did it. Okay. I mean, when I finally find somebody that's actually neck deep in this, I just love it to death. But what piqued your interest in doing this?
So, I'd love to be able to say to you, Flindt, that I had the same early vision that you had and knew it was a problem. And I said, I'm going to go and tell the story on those damn Sacklers and what's happening. But I didn't. What I did is when I pitched this idea for a book in 2014, 2015 to my publisher, it was really the history of the American pharmaceutical industry. And believe it or not, I just looked at this the other day. My wife and I were talking about it. Almost when I have a proposal into a publisher about a subject that I think I can make some progress on and tell a good story, when I finish the 3 or 4 or 5 years later, that book, it bears no resemblance to the original proposal because I don't know what I'm going to find until I go out and do the reporting. Anybody who submits a proposal for a book and says, this is what I'm going to tell you, they already know their mind's made up and they're just going to go in and fill in that information. So I didn't mention the opioids were a few sentences. The Sacklers were a passing reference. I thought they would be part of the story. They turned out to be the dominant part of the story. You don't know that until you do it. All the sins of pharma are there, but the part that got me on fire was the part about the opioid crisis, in part, and I think this will make sense to you, a lot of the drug story is how the companies, let's say, manipulate orphan drugs or how they have pharmacy benefit managers to raise prices or things like that. The opioid story was a human story. It was parents who had lost children, often to legal opioids. And once I started to get into that part of the story, I have a chapter in there called You Messed with the Wrong Mom, just one of the parents who lost a daughter and would not stop. Ed Bish and others who, have sort of put me on fire. I'm going this September. My wife and me are flying at our own cost to Washington, D.C., and we'll join the 3rd annual, mothers who have lost children to fentanyl, lost lives of fentanyl. I'll speak at that rally. I'm on fire on this. So you asked me, why did I do it? I didn't know it was going to be as much about opioids. That is the core part of the book. And that's part of doing what I call good reporting. One last thing, if I can. I put in a request to the FBI and all these other organizations to get information on all types of pharma executives. It's what I do in the beginning is freedom of information requests. They take a year or two to reply. Sometimes you get some paper, sometimes you don't. They sent me a boatload of material on the Sacklers. I'm still getting some, but it was all early stuff, which nobody had known about then, that in the 1940s and 50s, the 3 Sackler brothers, who later go on to buy Purdue and later go on to create OxyContin, were card-carrying members of the Communist Party. And I thought, how interesting that the Arthur Sackler, his brother Raymond, Raymond's wife, Betty, who was later on the board, were investigated by the FBI for nearly 20 years as security risk, once for possible treason, and went nowhere. They had undercover agents inside. I've gotten another 500 pages that these true, communists of the era in the Cold War turned into uber capitalists. They raked in the billions. They left aside their belief in, the better and common man or whatever else. And so it was just a fascinating little aspect of the story that, doesn't tell you anything more about the opioid crisis, but tells you a lot about human nature.
You bet. Wow.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either. That is just amazing.
I mean, because Flindt, Gerald, it really educated me on the Sacklers. Like, I knew a good amount about Purdue and so on, but as far as the Sacklers and just, I mean, the evasiveness of these people. I mean, correct my language if I'm wrong, but like dummy corporations, heads of businesses that didn't exist, the paper trail they hid and where they are now. I mean, they just walked away with billions of dollars.
Yeah, no, it's amazing because no, you're absolutely right. And I have a lot in the book about they just game the system all the time, just on this side of legal, right on the edge. And so in England, for instance, they were manufacturing OxyContin for a company they owned called NAP, NAPP Pharmaceuticals, sending it out through Europe. And they have this big subsidiary called Mundi Pharma, which has subsidiaries in like dozens of countries. There's a Mundi Pharma in the Bahamas. What they were doing is the English company NAP would have on paper the OxyContin would be manufactured in the subsidiary in the Bahamas, and then it would be sent from there to all the European orders. Well, there's no tax based upon that in the Bahamian subsidiary. Well, it turns out they never really manufactured them there. They manufactured them in England. On paper, it went there. And England changed their tax law as a result, but the Sacklers got away with avoiding hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes over a period of time. Nobody goes to jail for this. Part of the problem in pharma, part of the problem in oxy, part of the problem in opioids is that they meaning the manufacturers, the distributors, they pay big fines, but that's it. Look at the Cardinal Health, the big distributors, CVS, Caremark, AmerisourceBergen. They paid $23 billion in settlements. They knew where every pill was going in the United States. They knew when a little pharmacy in Kentucky that had a town of 1,800 people and we're getting 8 million pills, more than enough for 7 generations, right? And never reported to the FDA. There's so much blame to go around here. The FDA is reticent to take any action for a long time because they think that it's going to be all right. And so the Sacklers are, and deservedly so, the people that deserve a lot of blame because they were the first to come up with a time-release opioid product, and they pushed it more than anybody. But there's plenty of blame to go around, and all of them end up walking away with massive fines and plenty of money, and they still have their country club memberships. And we somehow tolerate that. The drug dealer on the street who's selling oxy or that, illegally, if they sell enough, they're going to get arrested depending on where they are. They might serve some time in prison. But if you've got a suit and tie on and you're doing it as a pharmaceutical executive, the odds are you're just going to lose some of your profits.
Yeah. No, actually, Gerald, you are just so right on the money with all of that. I want to ask you this, and then I just want to do a little follow-up. Now, I had heard at one point, because we all know that medications of any kind, they always have an expiration date on them. But we all know that those expiration dates are nonsense. If you keep those things in a safe, cool place, they can last 3, 4, 5 years and still have the potency to it. I heard at one time that Purdue, once the pharmacists or the pharmacies had those medications that the expiration date hit, that they would ship those back to Purdue. Purdue would then rebottle those under a distribution network called, of all things, Ethics, and then ship those again to Europe, to Scandinavia, to wherever. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
I had heard that, but I also heard that because there was a smaller market abroad, believe it or not. The U.S. was the biggest market without any doubt. In Europe, a smaller market. In Asia, Brazil, South America, they were expanding from 2015 on. They never made the headroads they had. But Purdue considered a return of a product for past the expiration date to be a failure of its sales team, meaning its sales team had not gotten the right dispensing doctors, the high prescribing doctors, because if they have sent X amount to a given location. They've sent it there based upon what they expect the orders to be. The sales team is coming back and telling them what they think the pill mills, the prescribing doctors, everything is going to prescribe. Now, if they've sent products that actually are there so long in the pharmacy that they expire and come back, that's a sign that the sales team overestimated what the product would move. And so they would come back and hammer the sales reps on what their expectations were. And you can understand that, because for them, it was all driven about, let's go to the biggest dispensing doctors, which I understand all the pharma companies do that, but here you're dealing with an addictive product that could be lethal. And let's go ahead and make sure that we get the numbers out. And it's strictly a numbers game at that point, which is, I know that sounds as a cold calculus. I don't mean to say that in terms of, taking away the human toll, but that's what it was for Purdue and others. And so you're right, there may have been that repackaging that went on, but I assure you that they wanted that to be zero because they didn't want product coming back.
Unbelievable. It's interesting, and you probably don't know this. I have never taken an OxyContin. For some reason, I knew they were here in our area. I'm going to say this is like 99, 2000. I knew they were here. I never bought a pill off the street. I was the king of doctor shopping. I had 12, 13 different doctor's offices going. I mean, and I was getting plenty from all these idiots. But when I was in treatment in 2001, there was this kid from the Boston area that came in town. We're all standing around smoking outside, and I asked this kid, I go, why are you here? And he goes, well, it's because of Oxy. And I didn't even know what that Oxy word meant. I knew what OxyContin was, but I go, what's that? And he explains this thing to me. And I'll tell you what, if I know to this day, deep in my soul, if I ever started an Oxy, I would not be sitting here today.
That's really interesting, because you were lucky. You're right, because Oxy comes out in 96. In 2001, it's just starting to be a problem. It's just popping up in some areas. And so interesting the way you said you had mastered, doctor shopping. I get it. Obviously, you were in a state, as Florida was, and I write about this in Pharma, where there was no database to be able to check to see it. Now, that problem wasn't something that existed for 6 months in Florida, for instance, which became Broward, the pill capital of America. At 1.85% of all OxyContin in 2014 and 15 is coming from one county in America. We used to drive up there to a chiropractor, Tricia and me, and he was actually next to a pill mill. The pill mills would advertise on these big billboards. There'd be an armed guard in front, and there'd be a line of cars literally parked down the block from Kentucky, Georgia, everyone else, people coming in. They'd be stopping at that. They'd get the pills would be dispensed in the clinic, the maximum amount that could be dispensed. It was a cash transaction. And then they would go and wait at some other clinic to be able to do it. Nobody in Florida in the state was verifying whether you were filling 10 prescriptions or not. And that type of, that's why I say, it's easy to just point at the manufacturers because they look like the bad guys, and the Sacklers in particular, because they're unique with Purdue because it's a family-run operation. Most of the pharmaceutical companies seem anonymous to us. They're these big entities, with shareholders and boards, and we can't name who the CEO is. With the Sacklers, you know it because it's a family, right? So it's different. But it's more than just the manufacturers, because they needed enablers. They needed the doctors who overprescribed. They needed the pharmacies who took the fake prescriptions. And they needed states that weren't doing the right thing in terms of immediately realizing they had a problem and starting at least to try to cut down on the amount of doctor shopping. Although maybe Flindt, and I don't know this, you would have to speculate, but if there had been, let's say, much stricter ban, let's say they were able to stop you from doctor shopping when you were in the midst of really wanting to fill 13 prescriptions, you might have gone to the street to get what you needed.
Oh, no question.
No, yeah, okay.
Yeah. No question about it. I mean, again, people don't get it. As addicts, that is our main job. Our job every day is to get that amount needed so we don't get dope sick. It's a real simple formula, and we will do anything to get it. I mean, we will bankrupt our own families. We will steal from loved ones. We'll steal from anybody, to get what we need for that day. I mean, there were times when I literally would have to go to 2 or 3 different doctors in the same day. Because one of them said, nah, Flindt, first of all, it's too soon. I can't write that one. Or, not, he's thinking this to himself. You're just bullshitting me. Okay. So I'm not going to write it. And then I'd maybe have to go to, and I was fortunate. I had a job. I had another business where I could be out at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. I worked in the legal field, so I would zip over to an emergency room, and hang out there for 4 hours to get, 30 pills, just to make sure I wasn't getting dope sick. So yeah, it's a circus.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
We spoke to a while back a physician who he was running the emergency room at Jackson, which is a big trauma hospital here in Miami-Dade, and then had been over at Mount Sinai later. And it's, Miami is a tourist area, so they would get somebody at the ER. And he said the person, in order to show that they weren't an addict, or to try to say that, say they had hurt themselves, something had happened. And they say, once a doctor had helped me, gave me something, I can't remember the name of it. It sounds like, Yep. Parkamon or Parkaman or and you say Percocet. That's it. You say, but it's fabulous because everybody has their angle to try to get it. That's right. Now, what's happened, of course, and you will understand this at Don't Hide the Scars. Trisha, a year and a half ago, went through breast cancer. She's fine. She went through 2 surgeries. She's good on this side of recovery. It's in her rearview mirror. But after the surgery, they said to her, and she was in a fair amount of pain, take a Tylenol and an Advil. And she said, really? And they said, do you have anything stronger, that might make this less painful for 24 to 48 hours? They said, no, we have new studies that show that Tylenol and Advil is just as effective as, opioids post-surgery. So what's happened is we go from one extreme to the other. From the time when they're doling out opioids like it's candy, what do you need? You need another week, to now people and I know people who are in chronic pain who go into a pharmacy to fill a prescription or be looked at like they're some type of drug addict or that, so it goes from one extreme to the other, and we never seem to find the balance.
Well, and the danger of that we saw, what was happening with the people that couldn't get their opioids that way, they're either turning to streets or heroin.
Yeah.
And we saw that overdose rate.
Oh, go through the roof. But no, you're absolutely right. Again, I've said it for years. We can't be consistent in anything. We're either far to the left or we're far to the right. Jason always has to watch my right hand because times I talk with my hands, I may hit him in the chin. But no, I mean, that is so true. But let me, you made a comment there that needs to be explained. First of all, it depends on the surgery you're having. I've had surgeries anywhere from a broken bone to open heart surgery. And there are times, I don't care who you are, what anybody says, when they cut your chest open with a chainsaw, you're going to need something a little bit stronger than Tylenol and an Advil, right? Now, that doctor is right to a certain extent, because what the opioid does, this is the best way I can explain it. It's the Tylenol in the medication that is actually the painkiller. The hydrocodone is a narcotic. that simply tells the brain
Right.
to tell you that you're not supposed to hurt. In other words, it makes you goofy so you don't care. Okay, right? But that's not what's taking away the pain. But with certain surgeries, I'm sorry, even today, I have to have a foot operated on in October, and it's going to be painful. But that doctor knows I'm in recovery. He knows that I'm going to get no more than maybe 10 pills. They're going to go to my wife. She's going to dole them out. And if they even think that I have got more pills other than that 10, my wife will stand there and tell me to drop my pants right in front of her and pee in the cup. Okay. Because nobody's going through that crap again, you know?
Yeah, no, I understand. No, I do understand. And it's interesting because the drug industry is subject to, changing the rules as it goes along in that. But I do agree with you that part of the problem here is that, certain drugs get tar and feathered as bad in their entirety. And that's a difficult thing. And also what you said before about how you would have gone to the street. I mean, that happened with OxyContin for a while. So they were losing, they meaning Purdue, they were losing customers in the original areas where they had made their inroads, Appalachia, stretches of Appalachia, hardworking and, people working in tough blue collar jobs with a lot of pain, ideal customers who want to keep working but want to get over the pain. And when they were, in many cases, addicted to opioids, they would find cheaper alternatives like heroin that was available on the street that seemed to them more powerful, and turn to that and forget about going through the process of trying to doctor shop for that. And Purdue realized that its numbers were dropping because not that customers were suddenly getting clean, but it was that customers were finding alternative ways to buy that weren't through a pharmacy.
Right. I also want to ask you this, because this is something that I'd heard. Look, I've been to Broward County. I've been down to where you are. I've been to I'm sorry, I just went blank. The beach. What's the name? Delray Beach. Yeah. And I know at one point, I think down there, you guys had like 1,500 different treatment centers.
It's astonishing. It's a small industry. I don't know why. I should do a story on that once. I'm not sure why Delray Beach, they may have, and this is a code in the city commission that gives them some incentive for that. There has to be some reason why that particular stretch of beach in Florida has attracted more of the treatment centers than anywhere else.
Yeah, I was invited to go to. In fact, they flew me out there to go look at this treatment center. And this gentleman was telling me, there are something like 13, 14, 1,500 different treatment facilities there. And I'm going, geez, I mean, I know you guys had a problem, but
but people come from all over the country. And one of the advantages they do is they advertise the fact you can be on the beach in Florida.
Right.
If you're addicted and you're in the middle of Minnesota in the winter, you might as well go down to Florida and try to go through a rehab program if you can.
Well, and that's part of the problem too. With the treatment industry. I own a treatment facility. I own a detox and residential here in the Central Valley, and look. When people start advertising the beach and horseback riding and all this nonsense, first of all, I've never known a horse to get somebody clean and sober. I don't care how much you talk to it. I may have talked to it, in my in my early days. But
why such a long face?
Why such a long face, dude? But I mean, and those treatment centers sucked in a lot of people, during those days. And again, did you see, I know you saw Dope Sick, but what's the other one? Body Brokers. Have you seen Body Brokers?
I have not seen it. It's on my, that's very good. I'm glad you reminded me. And on Dope Sick, by the way, I was a consultant. So, it goes by very fast. The credits at the end. Danny Strong, who made that, and it was a great film. Beth Macy we met her and she asked me to be a consultant in that, and much of the Sackler material, because Beth in her book on Dope Sick really doesn't write about the Sacklers per se. It's really about Dope Sick in that. So you read Dope Sick and you don't get the Sackler part of the story. Danny knew that I had that part of the story, so brought me in as a consultant. And Pharma, the book that I've written, has been made into a 6-hour documentary that Showtime had
Nice.
originally bought from, but we don't know. It's sitting on the shelf there, so we're waiting for Showtime to give us a date or to send it somewhere else. But at some point, it will be it is a 6 hour, and one of those hours is just on OxyContin and on opioids.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Look forward to seeing that.
You know, I also believe this wholeheartedly. You know, and by the way, I loved that movie. Okay. It was so correct in every different aspect. The same with Body Brokers. We did an interview with the writer of that, John Schwab. But what I'm seeing a lot is the fact that most people that are doing stories on this stuff, they never seem to be asking the right people the right questions. You know, when it comes to news reports, when it comes to lawmakers, when it comes to just the general public, I'm just going to say it. I don't know many people that are being, I could say I'm being the asshole, but I don't know many people that are really out there just nailing it, you know. And why are reporters so afraid to ask the right people the right questions?
It's a great question. I think that the problem is that a lot of reporters think that, and I'm going to make an overstatement here that can be proven wrong, I'm sure, a dozen times. But a lot of reporters, people I speak to, have daily jobs, bylines in newspapers and magazines, and that they think the problem's unsolvable. So therefore, they don't go after the story. They like to wrap up a neat little story with a good little ending that has something on it. They do a status report. They do something else about it, and they think they're stepping into quicksand. The homeless crisis, there are certain issues, right? The drug, and I use drug crisis as an overarching thing here. It involves so many things. So I think that some people have stayed away from that. Other times, it's the way the media works, much to our disdain. So, for instance, recently, the grandchild of Robert De Niro died of a fentanyl overdose, right? Yep. That got more press than, you know, if I was a parent of a child who died of a fentanyl overdose, and I was an anonymous person who was working hard at my job and earning $60,000 a year, and nobody paid attention, and then I saw that, I'd feel sorry for them, but I'd think to myself, we're a celebrity-driven society. Why does that, you understand, get the attention? It doesn't change the narrative. They already have arrested the drug dealer. Right. That's amazing. They can't arrest a drug dealer who's sending in kilos of drugs, you know, and they've already arrested that drug dealer. So you think to yourself, you know, there's something, it's not intentional. It's just the way the media unfortunately works. I'm using that as a great overstatement because there's some super reporters out there, some fabulous people like Beth Macy doing work and others. But I often think that a lot of people it's not just that they aren't asking the right questions, it's that they aren't focused enough on it. They aren't in the weeds enough to know what the right questions are.
Okay. Great point.
Yeah. No, and again, it goes back to for the lay person, it's hard to understand this.
Right. And so that's why I think I think there's a new series coming on Netflix or Prime on August the 10th that will be out about the Sacklers, the Empire of Pain, or that. Two very good books written about the Sacklers and that. But, you know, and that's great. It's fantastic. But I'm sure that people who watch that series will think that the opioid crisis was just about one family doing the wrong thing and not understand, right, you know, what goes. And by the way, Purdue is bankrupt, so it must all be over now. You know,
problem solved.
Problem solved.
Right? Exactly.
Like you said, people like the nice little bow.
Yeah.
Through your research with Pharma, your book, did you kind of, as you're doing your research, kind of go, oh wow, this is why the fentanyl crisis started to evolve? Because we can really, you know, if we look at the war on drugs, quote unquote, we can see that cycle of the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah. Well, so I wrote about fentanyl for the first time, 33 years ago for a national publication. So very early on. It's on my Substack. I'll send you a link to it, and maybe you could put it in the link to here. And it has interviews with DEA agents. This is in 1990, talking about January of 1990, about how fentanyl is going to be the next problem because it's a synthetic drug. You don't have to worry about crops. You don't have to worry about importation and this and that. Now, when I had that piece, I went to New York Times, Rolling Stone, New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, New Yorker. Everybody said, nope, sounds alarmist. Nobody was interested. That story got published in Penthouse Magazine. Remember Penthouse and Playboy used to do stories? Yeah. That's right. Penthouse Magazine is where that ended up because no other national journal thought that was a real story 32 years ago. Yes, it was early. I agree. In fentanyl. But what I'm saying is it's on the radar there for a long time if you think of what people in the government knew was coming up. And yes, it got delayed because of the popularity of prescription opioids for a while. But I think that there's no doubt there are those moments in which, as opposed to saying, wow, here it comes, I got in pharma to the point where it was the next wave. And what I mean by that is the pharmaceutical industry has this habit in which a drug that serves a legitimate purpose can be abused and gets diverted to the illegal market and then becomes a big problem and everybody loves it for a while and then they start to come down on it hard. So that happened in the early 60s with diet centers. They were very popular. It was essentially just speed being sold, so many pills, and then that became a problem. There was a crackdown. For 15 years, almost 20 years, it was benzos. Valium was the biggest selling drug in the world for 15 years, right? It was, and people thought benzos, including doctors, had no side effects. You'd never be addicted to benzos, right? So, and then, right, we have too much of a good thing, and Xanax replaced that, and then comes the opioids. So it's almost as though you're waiting for the next one to come in, the next one to drop, because pharma finds a way to get a product that has a psychological, physiological, or physical addictiveness to it that serves a legitimate goal, then overproduces it. They get the doctors to overprescribe. It finds itself diverted to the black market. It builds up this following. And then after 10 years, everyone's saying, well, how did we get here? Right. And and that's the DNA of the pharma industry. The drugs change, but the pattern doesn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Total sense. Absolute total sense. We can see this stuff coming, and I just don't know anymore. It's almost like I don't think I'm going to see any type of end to this in my lifetime. It's I just don't really see it. It's frightening. It's definitely debilitating to me. That we can't make some of these changes when some of these changes can be so easily done.
Yeah, I think there's another issue, and I watch what's happening, for instance, in Canada. I watch what's happening in different states around the U.S. in terms of harm reduction, drug treatment. The debate over it in Alberta, which is a conservative sort of district in Canada, as it goes. They have harm reduction, but they've rolled it out together with programs that really try to get people into a treatment program, right? So they're saying they go hand in hand. We're going to make sure that we have plenty of antidote to overdoses, and we're going to make sure that we have clean needles, but we're not going to go one step further, but we're also going to make sure you're not getting those needles unless you're sort of getting into a treatment program that we're going to make available. Now, the problem for that is it's a lot of money, and the success rates are slow. Politicians love to say, wow, we just spent $100 million and we have 32,000 people who were living on the street and addicted to drugs, and 28,000 are now clean and working at Starbucks, or some such thing. And you can't get those stats. They're tough. People are clean and they fall off, and it's a slow process. So I see the debate over it take place, and you have to get politicians willing to commit who have patience. And that's a tough thing in politics nowadays. Everyone wants, a solution tomorrow.
Yeah, it is. The whole harm reduction thing. I mean, Jason and I, we talk about this quite a bit. And, coming from an addict's standpoint, Look, I'm sorry. This is a devil on one shoulder, angel on the other shoulder topic, because I don't want anybody with Hep C. I don't want anybody getting HIV, but I'm not a clean needle guy for the most part. I am a huge Narcan advocate. I believe that every household, every schoolhouse, every school room has to have that. I am not a fan of fentanyl test strips because I really believe that we are sending the wrong message to our youth by saying, yeah, little Jimmy, okay, you know what? Yeah, you're going to do cocaine Saturday night? Well, here's a fentanyl test strip, okay, to make sure there's no fentanyl in your cocaine. Well, what kind of message are you sending to the 15-year-old? And by the way, that 15-year-old more than likely isn't going to test it anyway because they all trust their drug dealer. If I have to hear that one more time, I want to throw up. No. Right? So my philosophy is, again, how we change the treatment program. I mean, I've got some ideas, but I don't know who's listening. But the fact is that why can't we give these people at least the opportunity for abstinence?
Yeah. No,
if they can't do it, okay, then there's got to be some other methods that we can use. I just don't understand.
No. You're preaching the choir here for me. I mean, one of the reasons I'm aware of what Alberta's doing is I've testified to these parliamentary committees in the Alberta legislature about this. I'm not a fan of traditional harm reduction. Right. I do think it's maintenance addiction. We're going to get somebody addicted. We're going to maintain their addiction so that they don't die. They don't get sick from hepatitis. They don't die of HIV, and they don't overdose. We'll make sure that they get the right level. We're going to have essentially the equivalent of opium dens that we had at the turn of the 1900s. We'll have them again. They'll be legalized drug sites. And I'm not a fan of that. And I understand that may result in fewer overdoses, which politicians love saying, but it's certainly not helping the problem. But as a result of that, I do find there's a split, as you know, with parents who have lost children, because some of them think, and they could be right, that if there was let's say a fentanyl test strip before their child had died, they would think their child would have been smart enough to try the test strip. Right. And would have avoided. Right. You understand. You can't say that's impossible. So they think my child would have been alive. And so I get that, and it's a difficult thing. But so there's a split even among the parents, and I've seen people think that it's amazing that we're having this debate at a time when in the Netherlands, Amsterdam is essentially going the other way. Yes. They're closing up cannabis cafes. They're thinking of not allowing tourists to go in and be so easy. Years ago in Zurich, they used to have Needle Park, where people would go and shoot up. Europe realizes that a permissive system doesn't necessarily work. And I'm not sure here. San Francisco, my hometown, born and raised there. My family is still there. Many of my family. The progressive policies there in terms of harm reduction, or what's passed as harm reduction, have been devastating. Just devastating. Terrible.
I lived there for over a year, went to San Francisco State, and I couldn't imagine. I've had friends invite me back, or, hey, come bring the kids, we'll go to a Giants game. And it's sad for me to say, a city that held so many great memories for me, I'm a no.
Yeah, no.
And for me, I've tried to explain, mostly my youngest has asked more questions about what dad does. And it's for me, the disheartening thing that I always say is, okay, I get, and that big thing of the harm reduction is the decriminalization and everything else. Yes, the addiction, not a moral failure, unless you are going to rob and steal and everything else to fill your habit. But it's not humane either to just leave people out to die on the streets. This isn't what it's supposed to be about. Right? This isn't. And that's that's my perspective. That's what I see. Yeah. We see it here in Fresno. We drive by people that they're just left to die.
Right.
Right. But I also have to say, Jason, it wouldn't be if you then had, let's say, a very progressive politician who said, you know what, we can't have people dying on the street. This is really wrong. So instead, we'll put them in a camp on the edge of town, and we'll maintain their drug addiction with whatever it is. We'll provide them the daily amounts of heroin or whatever, and no one's going to overdose. But that still wouldn't be right. But you understand, it's even worse the way it is now. But I think that, because they don't want to confront the much more difficult, complex, and time-consuming process of really getting somebody into an option, creating an option for recovery.
Right. Now, here's something else for you guys to think about too. And because I agree 100% with what you're talking about, Gerald. Obviously, I agree with Jason on this. But there comes a point in every addict's life where there's what I call the imaginary line, that you have now gone over that imaginary line and you're not coming back. And that doesn't mean death. There's a lot worse things than death to the addict. And one of those things is continuing to live through this, because you get to a point where that substance use is going to, again, I don't explain things really well, but they're going to merge together the mental health side and the addiction side. And you will reach that point where there is no amount of any help out there that's going to save somebody.
That's interesting. So, but that point, though, I'm asking this. I say it as a statement, but I mean it as a question. Is different for every person, and you don't know it until you get there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why it's so complex. One of the reasons it's not easy. You can't just. It's not like sitting down, when they say, what's your pain level today? 1 to 10. Right. What's your addiction level? 1 to 10.
I used to love that. I would say 50. Okay. When I was in that hospital room, what's wrong with you people? 1 to 10. Oh, by the way, my legs snapped in half, so, there you go.
Oh, goodness. Well, and and I think that point too, to kind of spin off what Flindt and your question there, Gerald, is I think the perception of many is like, well, at least we're helping them not die. Yeah, but you're not helping them live either. Right. That's not living. Staying in the same 2-block radius where you never even get to explore your potential for what your gift is to this world and to yourself, and genuine joy. And it's a robbing.
It is. You're right. It's not allowing them to live. And, the additional problem is, and we've seen it in San Francisco, and there are other cities that have this. I mean, you set up, let's say, a safe injection site, or you set up a site. And what do you have within a 2-block radius? You have drug dealers, because they know that they have customers who are coming in. There are people going to that safe injection site who are IV addicts to something, and you might as well be able to offer them something when they're leaving that they may be interested in. And if you're not cleaning that up, as San Francisco hasn't been for a long time within that open air drug market outside, then you've essentially just not, quote unquote, set up harm reduction to keep people alive, but you've essentially set up the legalized drug mart. And, if that's what we want to do as a society, throw our hands up and say, okay, the war on drugs isn't working, and so therefore we give up. That's it. It's too hard. Some people are going to be able to pull themselves out like Flindt. That'll be great. But for the most part, we'll just keep it as an insurance issue. It's the wrong approach. I'm hoping we will get some broad-minded and good politicians at the state level and the federal level who will be able to see past the short-term political scoring points and really come up with some possible solutions here for the long term, because like you said, Flindt, otherwise we're not going to live to see it.
Right. We're not. I told an assembly person in San Francisco one time, I said, in regards to the safe injection sites, I said, do you think that addicts only use between 8 and 5?
That's fabulous. That's true.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, that assembly person took your advice and thought that was so good they got extra funding to make it 24/7.
That's right.
Yeah. And how much was their kickback in that process?
That's right. That's right.
Right.
There's always that incentive, right? And it tends to come in the form of green, and I mean cash money. So it's
true.
Gerald, people want to find out more about the book, the work that you're doing, and just connect with you. How can they do so?
I have a website, just my last name, Posner, POSNER.com. On there, there's a books page that'll show you links to different books, including Pharma. There's a little link to my Substack, which is a thing where I send out a weekly blog. I'll have information coming up in the next month or so on a new batch of FBI files on the Sacklers, and that have just been released to me. So there are things there on Substack. That's free, no charge. And I'm on Twitter as Gerald Posner. So I'm around at different spots.
Mr. Andersen.
Well, Gerald, thank you. This has been an absolute joy. I would love to have you on hell, even on a regular basis, because you are a pile of information for us, for our listeners.
I'd love to come back. I will definitely rejoin you. So let me know. In the meantime, just keep up the great work. And really, both Flindt, Jason, thank you very much for having me. Keep up the great work and don't hide the scars.